All right, today we're discussing what is the good in doing the most good, as Sam mentioned just a moment ago. So we go here. Great. This is week 104 of our weekly discussions. So just as a quick intro as well, what's
Can you
EA?
rotate? Can you rotate your phone?
Sure, let me do that.
Yes.
Okay, that will probably look better. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks again so much. So first, what is EA? EA is an idea to maximize the good you can do. There it is again, the good you can do through your career, your projects, and your donations. And second, it's a community or a movement of many individuals and organizations who care about this idea and who gather around it. So a quick roadmap. First, we're going to look at some different views of goodness. We're going to look at, well, does goodness equal well-being? Does good involve a certain kind of distribution among people who experience that well-being? Third, we'll look at, does goodness equal something else? As Christians, we might think of goodness as being associated with God's glory or about other duties or obedience. And then we'll look at some questions that we can explore as a group. So first, does goodness equal well-being? Well, what does well-being mean here? Here, I just mean what is most commonly used in philosophy to describe what is non-instrumentally or ultimately good for a person. So if you were to get lunch after this call, and I were to ask you like, well, why are you eating lunch? And you say, well, because I'm hungry, and I want the hunger to be satisfied. And I would say like, well, why do you want that hunger to be satisfied? And eventually this is kind of what kids ask. They keep asking you why. And eventually you get to something like, oh, well, it's good for, it makes me happy and it's good for me to be happy. It's non-instrumentally or it's ultimately good for me to be happy. That would be one version of well-being. And we might say that good things are things that lead to well-being. There are different kinds of forms of welfarism. So three we'll look at are hedonism, desire, satisfaction theories, and then also objectivist theories. First, looking at hedonism, this is maybe what a lot of people think of when they think of utilitarianism or just things that make people happy. If you ask somebody what does well-being consist of, the hedonist will answer the greatest balance of pleasure over pain. And yes, there are many criticisms of this. One famous criticism is the philosopher Robert Nozick's experience machine. Many of you are probably familiar with this, but the idea is, well, maybe you could link someone up to a kind of machine that would feed them experiences that would give them all sorts of pleasure and no pain, and it would be really, really effective at doing this. And is this something that you would sign up for this experience machine? You could leave in the chat your thoughts about whether you would sign up for the experience machine. And I think many people would maybe sign up, but many others would find this really unsatisfying. They would say, oh, my sensual desires are unlikely to be fulfilled by entering this experience machine. So we need some other kind of welfarism. We need some kind of desire theory. So a comprehensive desire theory would say that what matters to a person's well-being is the overall level of desire satisfaction in their life as a whole. You might say, well, we don't just want pleasure and not want pain. We have certain desires, certain preferences that we want to be fulfilled. And it's not as simple as pleasure or pain. But these preferences are oftentimes subjective. I think there are also objective desire theories. We'll get into that in a second. But oftentimes, each of us have different things that we want to see fulfilled in our lives, different potentialities in ourselves that we want to see actualized. And well-being is seeing our potential fulfilled. Oftentimes that does mean being happy, but there might be instances where we might not be happy, but we might be really fulfilled if we satisfy some desire. Like if we're training to be a good violinist, maybe it doesn't give us a lot of pleasure when we're training, but we desire to be a good violinist so much that it's worth more to us than the happiness from happiness lost from the intensive practice. So one problem with desire theories is you can imagine somebody whose desires or preferences are kind of out of touch with reality. So John Rawls puts forward this one criticism. He says, imagine someone whose pleasure is to count blades of grass in various symmetrically shaped areas, such as park squares and well-trimmed lawns, He's otherwise very intelligent and actually possesses unusual skills since he manages to survive by solving difficult mathematical problems for a fee. We might think there's something wrong with this if somebody just spent their time picking blades of grass, even though a desire theorist might say, no, this is welfare, this is good. The third kind of welfarism looks at objectiveless theories. And I think this is maybe closest to some more traditional understandings of welfare from the Christian perspective, although Christians might not necessarily say welfarism is equal with goodness. But an objectiveless theorist would say that theories which list items constituting well-being that consist not merely of pleasure or experience nor desire satisfaction, but might include things like knowledge or friendship or relationship with God or other things that humans objectively should have to have good welfare. And it's not a matter of personal preference. So this kind of pushes back against people who maybe have distorted preferences. We might imagine somebody who derives pleasure from watching torture. That might fit in a desire theory framework for what's maximizing welfare or what's maximizing the good. But an objectiveless theorist would say, well, no, it's not really, because drawing pleasure from watching torture or watching the Roman gladiators fight it out to the death is not the kind of desire that we are objectively made to have satisfied. Or maybe in a more Catholic sense or Augustinian sense, we might say we have disordered desires. And I think there are some interesting synergies in the Christian tradition on this. I don't know as much about them. I think some on this call would. So the second thing we might look at about the good in maximizing the good from an EA perspective is does goodness involve distribution? Sam talked about this in his paper or in his article. You can have some perspectives to say no, distribution among individuals and their welfare doesn't matter. What we want to do is maximize across all individuals in a population, maximize the welfare of them. And that might be a more totalizing view. Others might take a more egalitarian view and say what we want is like equal welfare among people insofar as we can. We pay a premium, or we might even like sacrifice some of the welfare of the people who are best off in society in order to make welfare for everybody overall a bit more balanced. You might also have certain preferential options for the poor. You might actually say the welfare that matters most is the welfare for people who are the worst off in society. And yeah, this is a question of distribution. So whether whether you take a hedonic view or a objectivist view, you might actually think that distribution matters when we're talking about overall welfare in the world. And then we might say that, well, goodness, it's something else. I want to raise an objection by a Christian philosopher named J.D. Moore, who was really influential in the early 1900s. He objected with this idea of something being good for someone. And J.D. Moore had this interesting idea that we should maximize things, but we should maximize certain values like beauty, not just pleasure and pain, but even beauty. And he thought that beauty could exist in the world, even where nobody was present to observe that beauty. And he gives an example of like, imagine a painting, a stunning Vermeer painting in a world that nobody observes, but the world is better off by having more beauty in it. So yeah, not all definitions of goodness are from a welfarist perspective. G. Moore, for instance, would say that that might be some aspect of goodness, but other aspects of goodness don't involve welfare. And then we might have other Christian perspectives on this. We might be familiar with the idea that what is good is ultimately God. God is maybe definitionally what's good. And we might think that in a naive sense, what is good is the things that God says is good. Maybe God has reasons, or maybe those reasons aren't apart from his existence, but goodness must be wrapped up in God, some would say. Or goodness is essentially, or in large part, having a right relationship with God. So the Westminster Shorter Catechism says that the chief end or the purpose of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And I don't know if there's an entry there about goodness, but I think it would be closely wrapped up in this notion. So some discussion questions. What do you think is closest to goodness? Which of these ideas here that we discussed, or maybe ideas that we didn't discuss, maybe about fulfilling duties or other good things in the world? do you think is closest to goodness? Maybe what do you think about these ideas of the experience machine, or the man who spent his life observing blades of grass, or something like that? Which of these do you think stacks up, and which don't? How does Christianity shape your view of what's good? And feel free to draw from any verses that you're familiar with. And then also, does it make sense in your definition to do the most good? I think that for many of us it will. Many of us are pretty committed to certain ideas within effective altruism. So we're kind of self-selecting for people who would say yes, but maybe some of us would say no. You can't do goodness in this kind of sense. But any other things you want to talk about? So yeah, thanks for bearing with me here, and let's jump into breakout rooms.